Thank you, Andrzej, for kind introduction. We're gonna watch some games. We're gonna talk about some movies. So hopefully you will also learn something from this presentation. Hopefully I'll also learn something new from this presentation. So very often in some interviews, in the conversations with other activists, with other organizations, I get this question about what I learned during my years of activism, what I learned during the years of being in Otwarte Klatki and in Anima International. And for me, the most important skill that I learned and I keep on trying to improve in my life and in my activism is how to make decisions. It doesn't mean that I'm great at it. It just means that I think it's very important for me personally, and I think it's very important for all activists to improve the skill of making the decisions in their lives and in their activism, in their organizations. I'm not going to get into some deep techniques, how to make the decisions step by step. I'm going to mostly talk about how our thinking about making decisions is broken because how we are raised in the society, what the pop culture teaches us about decisions, and what are the common errors we make in our decision-making processes. A lot of things I'm going to talk about is basically stolen from two books. One is How to Decide, the other is The Scout Mindset. I'm going to talk about them a bit more at the end. But yes, honestly, there's a lot of theft from these two books, but I think it's still a valuable thing. So, why it's not working? Thank you. Try to answer for yourself these following questions. What was the best decision you made this year? What was the worst decision you made this year? And then two more questions. Did your best decision have a positive or negative outcome? Did your worst decision have a positive or negative outcome? I think the framing questions like this goes against our intuitions about decisions because we tend to think about decisions that good decision means the good outcome of the decision. I think the most important thing for me in this presentation is saying very clearly that good decision is a very different thing than positive outcome of the decision, and bad decision is a very different thing than negative outcome of the decision. Maybe some of you processed it already in your minds. For me, it was really important to learn to think about decisions in this new way and think about outcomes of decisions in this new way. And I think that thinking that good decision is the same thing as positive outcome is something that we have to unlearn to learn how to make good decisions in our activism, in our lives in the future. So let's imagine a very simple example. Let's imagine that you have to drive for the meeting with a big donor in other city. On the highway, there's some accident, and you have to take another road. You're driving through the countryside, and you worry that you might be late for the meeting with a very important big donor. So you have to make a decision. Do you continue to go slow and safe and risk being late on the meeting, or you decide to speed up and take a risk of something bad happening to you on the way? So let's also imagine that those are the estimates of different things that might happen to you if you decide to speed up. So let's say that there's 5% of chance of getting big fine and losing your driving license. There's 0.2% of your death in a car accident, and 40% chance of getting a small fine for speeding up. Those are completely made up, just to give you the picture. And now, let's imagine that you decide to speed up. You get to the other city, you're on time, you have a great meeting, everything's fine, no one died, no one got any fine, you didn't meet the police, and you think that it was a great decision to be made. But let's imagine another scenario where you have an accident, you die, your friends come to your funeral, and they all say that it was so stupid decision that you made about speeding up. So you have the same decision with two different outcomes, and the judgment based only on the outcome of the same decision in the same circumstances, but the thinking about this decision is broken because different outcomes. And one of the most important things about decisions is to understand that there are only two main factors that will determine the outcome of your decision. Luck, which obviously you can't control, but you have a lot of control over the quality of your decision-making process. So obviously the next logical step is to try to improve our quality of our decision-making process. And for this, we need to find good tools. So what are the tools to improve our decision-making process? I think one of the most popular, if you ask people around, is the pros and cons list. I think this is something that you see in movies, in books. This is something that people usually mention when you ask them about making the decisions. So if we go back to the example of driving, on the pros side, you would have being on time. On the cons side, you would have death in the accident. So it seems like it's 1 against 1, which means that the pros and cons list is really flat, and it doesn't really show any weight that those decisions and the outcomes carry with them. So I think maybe in some very simple situations, simple decisions, it could make sense, but usually it's a pretty bad tool to make that decision. So I think we need a crystal ball. But unfortunately, because of inflation and all the problems in the world, it's pretty difficult to get the crystal ball nowadays. So we need to get as close to the crystal ball as possible. And being close to having the crystal ball means gathering as much information as possible to be able to predict what's going to happen in the future. And if we analyze bad decisions and bad outcomes of decisions, usually, or just maybe very often, there are bad outcomes or bad decisions because not enough information was gathered to make the decision. So obviously, the crystal ball is like a perfect solution, which we'll never get, but we can keep trying to be as close as possible in this particular decision that we have to make. So let's try another example. Let's imagine that you make the decision to take a new job in a new place. The job turns out to be great. You love your coworkers. The job allows you to fulfill yourself. After 1 year, you get promoted. The question is, was it a good decision? And obviously, I think everyone, me, myself, for sure, I have the intuition to say yes. But this intuition is only based off a thing called outcome bias, which means that we judge the decision only on the basis of the outcome that it delivered. So we don't really know how big was the chance of all these things happening. We don't have enough on the information about the situation of choosing that job. So we have some intuition about judging this decision, but the truth is that we don't really know because we don't have enough information to say if it was good or bad decision. Okay. The area that really fascinates me when it comes to decision-making processes is the world of sports. In the last years, maybe even decades, analytics and data analysis really came to the world of sports very strongly. And nowadays, in team sports especially, all teams have like their own statistician, data analysis, a lot of people working on analyzing the data, collecting the data, like all the players are tracked all the time. A lot of numbers are included in planning the games, analyzing the games, etc. But somehow, I think it doesn't include the management of sports. So in the management of sports, still, I think judging the decision is very poor. And it's very often based on only on the outcomes, not on the quality of the decision. And the careers of many players, many non-sports personnel in teams, in organizations, are decided only on the outcomes, not necessarily on the quality of the decision of the process. And to prove this point, I'm going to use the example from the real life. So this year, 2019, it's semifinals of NBA Eastern Conference. There's a team of Philadelphia and team of Toronto, and the score is tied. And the situation is that if the team from Toronto, white t-shirts, manages to score in the last 4.2 seconds, they win. And if they don't, the game goes overtime, and it means that the team from Philadelphia has a big chance to win this game. And let me play it.
It's off to Leonard, defended by Simmons. Is this the...
Okay, so it's not sure how clear you see it, but a lot of decisions will be made after this game just because this ball goes in the basket or doesn't go in the basket. So this situation in which a lot of luck will determine careers and future decisions of many people in the organizations, many people in the teams, only because of the outcome that was mostly determined on the luck in this one particular situation. Yeah, so as you can clearly see, so much luck. And because of this luck, the Toronto team won a championship back then. And Philadelphia team still remembers this one game in which this 0.2 seconds and this situation of loss of luck determined their lives for many, many years. And unfortunately, still in the world of sports, many decisions are judged and evaluated only on the basis of the outcomes. Another life example is the movie that you maybe heard about, Star Wars. The best science fiction movie was before the Star Trek. There's some, I don't know, people like it, I don't know why. The guy, George Lucas, who created the Star Wars, sold the rights to produce Star Wars to 20th Century Fox. But before that, he tried to sell it to United Artists, Disney, and Universal, and they all refused. And if I ask you now, what do you think about this decision that these three companies made? I can assume that many of you would say that it was a horrible decision, because obviously we all know how the history of Star Wars continued, especially that many years later Disney had to buy it back. But do we actually know how they made this decision? I mean, from today, it is easy to say that it was a stupid decision, and they lacked the vision for the Star Wars movie. But maybe from their perspective, it made totally sense not to go this way, because there was huge risk of Star Wars failing. I don't know, maybe it was a bad decision, maybe it was a good decision. The truth is that we don't really know. We tend to think that it was a bad decision because of a thing called hindsight bias, which is our tendency to think about past decisions as something that is obvious for us from today's point of view. So kind of thing called, I knew it's going to happen. But we knew it would happen this way only because we know the history, of course. So it's easy to judge people from these companies without knowing exactly what was their way of thinking to make this decision. And I think it's also important when we think about decisions in other organizations, that from outside, they might seem like irrational or bad decision that the organization made, but without having access to full information why they made such and such decision, I think we have to be very careful about making strong opinions about other organizations and their decisions. Okay, so what are the lessons for us from all of that? It's not all the lessons, it's just 6 things that I think are important. Writing down how we make important decisions. I really recommend writing down everything that you do and describing your ideas, decisions in the writing down process, because it really helps to look up to your ideas and at your decision from a bit of outside point of view, because if you write it down, you make the judgment a bit like other person, because you see your ideas on the paper or on the screen. And it's also important to be able to come back after some years to your decisions that you made in the past, because it's very easy to forget the reasons you made such and such decisions. And if you write it down, if you describe the process that led you to this decision, I think it's very helpful for the whole organization, especially that maybe you're not there anymore and other people can understand why you made such and such decision. Very important thing, to have some self-understanding and self-compassion. So, as I said before, we don't have influence on the luck. And we have to recognize when we made the bad decision, the bad decision-making process, and when it was actually beyond our impact. So things might go wrong way, but maybe it wasn't actually our fault. And I think especially in activism, people tend to think that many, campaigns, failures, many mistakes, organizational failures are their fault. Maybe they are, maybe they're not, but you have to learn to understand what is in your control and what is not. And in Otwarte Klatki and in Anima International, we try to talk as much as possible about our mistakes, but very often we also ask each other, would you make the same decision? Would you do the same thing? Again, with the same amount of information. And very often people say, yes, I would do the same thing. So then it means like, so why do you think you failed? I mean, you can learn from the past events, past mistakes, but still you have to learn to have some self-understanding and self-compassion. We have to learn to imagine so-called multiverse view of the decisions. So it's just kind of an image of different scenarios, how the reality can develop. It's also helpful to maybe write down some different scenarios of the future. And then I think it's also helpful to learn thinking about decisions, considering three important factors: preferences, which means what outcomes do you like the most, payoffs, which means gains and losses. Within this possible gains and losses after this decision, and probabilities, so what are the chances of different outcomes to happen. And it's important to remember that being smart or intelligent will not save you. In many cases, intelligent people, they are like smart enough to fool themselves. So in some cases, intelligent people are even better in fooling themselves using some biases, like, for example, outcome bias. And you can see sometimes that very intelligent people, very smart people can follow very strange paths because it's sometimes easy for them to fool themselves. And I think this is very important for organizations. I'm trying to think about saying yes as borrowing money. And very often in animal rights activism, in different social activism, we have to decide about getting involved in some project or some idea, new campaign, or not doing that. And I think for sure we made these mistakes in Otwarte Klatki, that we decided too quickly to start some new campaigns, because it's very tempting to just say yes to great ideas, but I'm trying to think about saying yes as borrowing money. So there's a loan that you will have to pay back in the future using your time, resources. And also to remember that always saying yes to one thing, it means saying no to other thing. So if you decide to go with campaign A, maybe it means that you will not be able to follow different campaign in the future. Okay, and one of the greatest thing here, I think that to make good decisions and to be able to follow great decision-making process, it's very good to adapt this negative thinking mindset. Negative thinking mindset is not about complaining in your lives. We strongly advise against that. Negative thinking means that you are able to predict and imagine negative events in the future, some obstacles for your ideas, campaigns, etc. Me personally, I'm a person who, if I go outside, I'm thinking that there's significant chance of falling down on the floor and breaking my nose. And if I drive a car, I always think that it's possible that I'll not get to my destination. So I think I have pretty strong negative thinking mindset. There is also some research mentioned in the book, The Scout Mindset, about better survival chances of people with negative thinking mindset in situations, in some extreme situations like being lost in the middle of the forest for weeks. Because if you have negative thinking mindset, you're better at predicting some difficulties, and therefore you're better at not following some paths that may lead you to these difficulties. So I think pop culture, society, everything around us teaches us about the power of positive thinking that will bring the great results to our lives if we just focus enough and we think positively about it. I think, and there's good research about that, that is actually the opposite. And for me, it's just common sense thinking that you have to adapt to some degree this negative thinking mindset to be able to predict the difficulties and obstacles in the future and to be prepared for them. Because if you don't think about it, how else can you prepare? And it's a bit different topic than decision-making process, but it's super important from my point of view to have this negative thinking mindset to be better at making the decisions. And I think good decisions-making process is just not possible without adopting the negative thinking mindset. So there's just so much power in negative thinking. Okay, and the last thing I'm going to talk about is 6 steps to better decision making, which is from the author Annie Duke, that I will talk about in the next slide. This one idea how to approach decision-making process, I think it's very useful in many situations. I don't think you should use it in all decisions that you make every minute in your life, like what to eat at breakfast, etc. But I think for me, in many decisions in the organization, I'm trying to use more or less this scenario. So the step 1 is identifying a reasonable set of possible outcomes. Then step 2, identify your preferences by determining which results will bring you closer to your goals. And I think this is a very important part to focus on your goals, not just this one decision to make, but what is your actual goal as a person, as an organization, and what are the preferences of the outcomes to get you closer to the goal. Estimate the probability of all outcomes. In Otwarte Klatki and Anima, we're trying to use in terms of percentages and numbers. Very often we compare each other's estimates of different scenarios, which is sometimes very fascinating how different we look at things from each other, even if we usually have, it seems to be that usually we have the same point of view, but then you see that some estimates we give are so different, and it's very fascinating to dig deeper to see the reasons for that. And step 4, compare the likelihood of the outcomes you prefer and those you prefer not to see with the risk they entail. And then you repeat the steps 1 for the options you consider, and then you compare these options with each other. It's not like algorithm that you just put the information inside, you press the button, and the results just comes to you. There's still a lot of estimates, a lot of guessing, a lot of intuitions, but I think you can get better and better in it. And even if you make the decision with negative outcome, you can still learn a lot from this experience if you understand how you made the decision. So, as I said in the beginning, a lot of the things I talked about is stolen from 2 books. How to Decide by Annie Duke. This one I don't think is that popular within EA and animal rights movements. I found it very useful. You will find a lot of homework in the book to do, a lot of practicing to how to make the decisions, a lot of examples. I think it's also pretty technical. And then the Scout Mindset, which I think is pretty popular within EA. I think it was one of the greatest books within, I know, effective altruism way of thinking, let's say, in last years. So Scout Mindset, I think we recommend it for everyone in the organization to read it. It hasn't happened yet, but this is what we recommend. Julia Galev has also a very interesting podcast, which is called Rationally Speaking, I think. Yes. So yeah, that's all I had to say. As I said at the beginning, it's not like an expert on decisions-making processes, but those are some things that I learned in recent years. I find them useful, and I think they're super important to run the organization. So thank you.
Okay, thanks, Paweł. If you have any questions, please do submit them through the Eventory app. It's really easy, and I have a few for you. The first one is, can you walk us through a case study really quickly of a decision that you made applying the 6 steps of decision making that you talked about?
Okay, so it's difficult to present like exact steps, like sometimes it's a lot of documents, but recently we were recruiting in Otwarte Klatki for the position of fair campaign coordination, and in the end we didn't find anyone for this position, so we had to decide between hiring like the best available person that we didn't find good enough, between just not hiring anyone there and moving other employee from her position to part-time work on fair campaign. And the person who was responsible to make this decision created a list of possible outcomes, and she asked several people for the feedback, what they think are the risks in this scenario, what good things could happen with this scenario, what are the probabilities for this and thing going that direction or that direction. So there was some estimates and some math involved, but also some intuitions of people with experience in it. And I was one of the people asked for the feedback. I was pretty in the decision-making process, but I wasn't the person to make that decision. And when the decision was made, I found it a bit surprising. I expected a different one before the process, but I mean, you can't argue with such a process. Like, you see the reasons, you see the different feedbacks of the people, you see the thinking behind that, and then you start to think that maybe your intuition is wrong, and you have to rethink your intuition that you had before. So I think this is one example about that. In Otwarte Klatki, currently we also have several processes of evaluating campaigns we had in the past. Should we kill them? Should we keep them? And there's gonna also include a lot of decisions to be made, so this process will be also happening here.
Okay, thanks. This one's from Savnius. I struggle with taking too long to make insignificant decisions. Any advice on that?
I expected that question, so I'm prepared. I'm not sure where this information I took from, but it says that the time the average person spends deciding what to eat, watch, and where adds up to 250 to 275 hours per year. So it's something like 11 to 12 days a year spent on just deciding what to eat, what to wear, what to watch. And I think many people have this experience of scrolling through Netflix, which takes more time than watching Netflix. I don't have any better solution than just to learn through experience. Me personally, I am a person who, if I go to a restaurant once and I pick one dish, I'm gonna pick that dish for next 50 years if I go to this restaurant. So there's one strategy. That you just limit the decision-making process in things that you find not that significant. But then you also have to ask yourself what is significant for you. I remember that there are some pretty cool suggestions in how to decide about it, like what questions you could ask yourself to decide if this decision is significant or not. One idea is to imagine that, let's say you have to decide if you go to, I don't know, even important decision, like if you go to a care conference or not. Imagine that you have to think about this decision in a month, like how significant in a month this decision will be for your life, like, and the same in 5 years. Like in 5 years, if you have to think about decision from today about going or not going to care, like how important for your life and the life of your organization will be in 5 years. So maybe in the case of care, it could be important because you meet nice people, you get inspired, maybe it's important for your organization. But then you have decision like, I don't know, should I go to the movie tonight to watch this movie with that person? And will this decision have any impact on my life in 6 months? And it's possible it's gonna be tiny impact. So maybe whatever decision you make, it's the same result. So you can learn just to limit the time you spend on decisions. Yeah, but I think it's also it depends on your personality to some degree. I find it annoying to take too much time to make simple decisions. So I prefer to make like wrong decision and just do it quickly than to decide for too long time in simple things. It gets more complicated in organization, I guess. So then it's a lot about trust for your colleagues in the organizations. And for example, as a CEO, do I need to be included in so many decisions, or do I put enough trust in my colleagues so I can just live with the decisions they make, even if I can expect that some of them maybe will be wrong. But otherwise, it would require me to get involved in all of that.
Okay, thanks. This one's from Oleg, and slightly related maybe. How bad is a negative experience for the further decision making? How to fight with negative expectations on a certain campaign or action once you already had a bad experience with it?
Can you repeat it?
Yeah. How bad is a negative experience for the further decision making? How to fight with negative expectations on a certain campaign or action once you already had a bad experience with it?
So experience of the campaign, for example, negative experience of campaign.
I believe it's a question about making mistakes mostly.
Yeah, as I mentioned, I think it's about self-understanding, and also is the same for understanding colleagues in the organization. I mean, if you see that someone, or maybe you yourself, you don't try to learn to make better decision-making process, this is pretty worrying, and it will be worrying for me as an employer, for example, and as a CEO, to see that someone is not focused on making, on learning how to make high-quality decision-making process. But if I see someone making mistakes and taking the reasonable risk and making mistakes, then I think even with the negative experience from the past, if you learn to have this self-understanding and self-compassion, you can overcome that. Yeah, I'm not sure if that answer. Yeah.
Hopefully it does. If not, please reach out to Paweł directly. And I think we have time for the last one, and it's from Machi. Can you give an example of when you said yes and it was a mistake?
Yeah. Okay, so 3 months ago, I was asked to give a talk at CARE conference. And I said no, because I'll have too much stuff meanwhile, and I'll not be able to prepare for that. So you better ask someone else. I will not have time to be well prepared to give a talk. And a week ago, someone canceled, I think. And I was asked, can you recycle the talk that you gave at Anima International Summit? And I, of course, agreed. So I think saying no could be a mistake back then. So it's a bit opposite. And maybe I could say that saying yes maybe would be a mistake if this presentation was not successful. But from the history of organization, let me see. Okay, I think for me, I'm not sure if everyone in Anima would agree with that. But for example, we jumped into campaigning against wet markets at the beginning of pandemic because it felt important at that time. And obviously, we said yes to this. And in the end, it didn't have any impact, I think. And later on, the campaign was kind of continued, but no one was responsible for that. So it was just something we had to end. But it was like an obstacle to do other things. So it took us time to properly kill it. And I think it was a mistake to start it from the beginning. But at that time, it was so clear that yes, the pandemic, wet markets, yeah, let's do that. And I think in the past, we also made some mistakes of the recruitment process when we decided to hire someone with not enough knowledge, with not great recruitment process. And I will also put it in the category of saying yes too easily and in some cases it backfired because after some months you have to let someone go, and it's even more work for everyone around new employee. So because of that mistakes, we improved our recruitment process, which nowadays is long and complicated and painful sometimes, but at least you have you can be sure that at the end this yes to hiring someone is a well-thought decision and not a mistake. And even, I mean, it still can happen that someone will be bad fit, but I have the feeling that we do what we can to make sure it's not going to happen.
Okay, I will allow one final one. This will be the final one. How do we avoid analysis paralysis? For example, not making a decision at all because we don't have perfect information or analysis.
Yeah, so it depends on the situation. I mean, in life, you can just say, like, what's the worst thing that can happen? And, I mean, even the worst, like, you can die, but it's, like, not the end of the world. Maybe yours, but, I mean, I don't know. In most of the situations, like, the worst thing that can happen is really not that bad. So whatever decision you make is better than making no decision. And in organization, I think it's also important to explain to people that you have to make some decision and live with it. Even if it's going to be a mistake, we can still learn from that. But not deciding about something is also a decision. Like, for example, doing or not doing campaign. If you just prolong this decision, it means that you decide not to do it for a longer time. So you make the decision, you just make the decision to avoid the topic, for example. Yeah, but I think even if in organization, the question of like, what's the worst thing that can happen is also a good one. In some cases, the response is that, yeah, like bad things can happen because, okay, for example, you might have a campaign that you recognize at some point that could be bad for the animals because of, for example, small animal replacement. And if you decide to continue this campaign, you might think that the result is harming more animals. So maybe the result of that decision is important, and maybe it's good to even spend or kind of waste, but not waste, way more time that you felt in the beginning, because the outcome is important for your work for the animals.
Okay, thanks. We're unfortunately out of time, so please give a round of applause for Paweł.
Thank you.
And